welcome to Mooney Reads, and welcome to a very overdue reading wrap-up video. Since the beginning of the year, I've posted one wrap-up for January and February. So, we're long overdue. It's August as I'm making this. So that's like 5 months worth of books. So I'm going to be making 2 wrap-up videos for this length of time. One will be fiction and the other will be nonfiction. And I'm going to start out talking about the fiction books. So I'm going to start out talking about the kind of more adult-oriented books that I read before moving on to YA and then middle grade. And then I will wrap up this video with poetry. Some poetry is fictionalized, some's nonfiction, a lot of it's somewhere in between. However, I read way more fiction than nonfiction, so I'm putting it in fiction just for the sake of the video. This year has been really nonfiction heavy, so only about 1/3 of my reading has been fiction, but I still have quite a few to talk about. So we'll start off with some romance. I read the Moonlighters trilogy by Anita Kelly and absolutely loved it. This is a novella trilogy, all set at the same gay bar, Moonies, or I think it's called maybe the Moonlight Cafe or something like that, but everyone calls it Moonies. And I read it out of order. It doesn't really matter what order you read it in because they're kind of 3 separate stories. I started with the last one because I loved the cover so much and I really wanted to read about a butch couple. And it was my favorite of the trilogy. I absolutely adored it. This is focused on the bartender and this trucker who fairly regularly will stop by Moonies. It was just really sweet, and I loved the music references in this one in particular, as well as the description of the like Pacific Northwest landscape and stuff like that. The second one that I read was actually the first one, Sing Anyways, which focuses on 2 bar goers, a plus-size bisexual woman who frequents the karaoke and is very much the life of the party, and a non-binary professor who is usually a little quieter. They usually go to this bar with their group of friends, but this is an off week where their friends don't show up. And so they end up talking to this group that they've seen but haven't really interacted with, which is where the 2 meet. And then the final one that I read was my least favorite. The second one in the series, Our Favorite Songs. And this one is 2 gay men who had like a one-sided rivalry in high school. But there was a lot of like confusing, like resent for feelings or something like that. And then there's a bigger point in there that I think maybe avoid talking about just because it's such a short book, so it'd be spoilery, but I liked the middle of this one a lot, but I didn't care for the beginning or end. I think the confusing lust for hate thing just does not make sense to me and is kind of irritating. And then the end of it was annoying because the kind of second act breakup was particularly silly, and one of the characters says something super out of pocket that I don't think is dealt with enough. But overall, I did really like the trilogy, the series. Like I said, the third one is the strongest. And the thing that I really love about these, I don't actually tend to vibe super well with romance novellas, or I'm very picky about which ones I do read. That's true of romance in general. But these ended up having a lot of character depth, especially for something so small. And that, I think, is what I appreciated the most about these. After that, I've got some unhinged lit fic with After Dolores by Sarah Schulman. I'm continuing on in my Sarah Schulman fiction reading saga. This one was really interesting. in terms of like kind of what it's talking about, so this focuses on a woman who just got out of a relationship and ends up kind of hooking up with someone who's cheating on their longtime girlfriend. It's messy, like all caps messy, also deeply disturbing. There are multiple instances of violence in different ways. So it's messy, weird, disturbing, but I think what she's exploring in here is like interpersonal dynamics and violence. I'd be interested to maybe revisit this after reading the nonfiction work that she wrote over 20 years after she wrote this one. Conflict is not abuse. I actually saw someone who wrote a review saying that they kind of saw some of the seeds of what she talks about in there in After Dolores. So I'm intrigued. Next I have an anthology that's a collection of fiction and nonfiction, and that is Lesbians in Germany, edited by Lillian, Faderman, and Brigitte Eriksson. This is a collection of excerpts and short stories that were written pre-World War II and translated from the German after that. This was a really cool collection. I love reading queer history stuff. I think that the introduction did a really good job kind of tying these things together, and it gives a lot of perspective about how people felt about lesbian identity at the time, the disparate kind of experiences and opinions in terms of what that meant, both in terms of language, but also in terms of like sexuality versus gender, or where the two meet. There were a lot of different experiences with that, whereas it was pretty common for some people to see themselves as like a third sex, whereas there were other people who kind of saw themselves as more like masculine, and then other people kind of saw lesbianism in a more like philosophical way. And I think it's extra interesting because I can see those same conversations in like mid 1900s to contemporary, like at least my framework, like US, is reflected kind of in this late 1800s, early 1900s German landscape. Just super neat. Time is a flat circle, and identity is messy. It's really cool to read about. After that, we can move on to the YA books that I read. I did some rereading over the past few months. I reread The Hunger Games, which I had not read since, I don't know, probably 2011 or something. I've definitely read it a lot, but it was before I put everything in Goodreads or whatever. And this one definitely stands the test of time. Like, I really enjoyed it. I gave it like a, I think somewhere in the high 4 stars, like a 4.5 or something like that. It was just really solid, and I'm really excited to read the rest of them. I'm actually no idea when this is going to come out because I've not finished rereading the whole trilogy, but I was vlogging my way through the trilogy and reading nonfiction that's relevant to the Hunger Games, its creation, and the kind of stuff it's talking about. So that'll be up eventually. The other book that I reread was Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, which I read for the first time more recently. I think I read it for the first time in 2019 or 2020 twice, and then maybe another time after that. But I reread it again and absolutely love it. I feel like every time I read it, I notice something different. This takes you through kind of a moment in this person's life where they're dealing with kind of a toxic on again, off again relationship. And it really shows you how this impacts her friends as well. And I think this time I really did focus in on her best friend Doodle. And I think because of that, ended up kind of meditating on different things throughout it. So it was really good. Made me cry just like every other time I've read it. And then after that, we get to some newer reads. I read Donuts and Doom, which is another graphic novel. It was okay. I wanted to really like it. The art was really cute, but ultimately it was kind of clunky and the pacing was off. I ended up enjoying the other book with donuts in the title better, The Do's and Donuts of Love by Adiba Jaigirdar. And I've read a couple of other books by her, The Henna Wars and Honey and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating, both of which I liked. I think The Henna Wars is my favorite, and that still stands at this point. I thought that it was really cute. This focuses on a teenage girl who is obsessed with baking in reality TV shows, but is dealing with a really intense breakup. In this story, she is actually going on to a reality baking show for teens, and is really excited about it until she sees who the other contestants are. So she has to deal with being on national TV with her ex that not everybody knows she even dated. So things get messy. There's a lot about this that I really liked. Ultimately, it was a really fun read. I do think that it's the weakest book by this author that I've read so far. But I think that if the premise sounds interesting to you and you just want to read a fun YA, this is a really good one. And then the final book that I have for the YA category is a manga. I actually have this. And that is I Hear the Sunspot. This is a BL manga with a deaf main character. This first volume was actually a reread, and I did enjoy it. I think that there are aspects of the pacing that I might have had sort of an issue with, but I think that comes from the fact that this was originally, I think, serialized. It was like published, and then this is kind of a bind up. I'm in the process of reading through this. I won't talk in detail about the 2 volumes that I read this month, but I have read since then. So far, this one is my favorite volume, but we'll see how I feel after I wrap up the Limit arc. But in general, I really appreciate each of the characters and their personalities, and I think that there's been some really cool discussion about accessibility throughout this so far. And I put this in the YA category because it felt kind of YA. I'm not sure that this has a rating on it. There's nothing really like questionable or explicit in this, so I don't think it's actually rated T, but I think that the audience is still more young adult, probably. Both of the characters are in college. That brings us to middle grade, and I've only read one middle grade book the last few months, and that was the Seance Tea Party. And this is really cute. It focuses on a little girl who is, I believe, going into middle school, but her friends and her are kind of on different wavelengths. She doesn't really want to get into like romance and maybe some of the other stuff that some of her friends are interested in. And near the beginning of the story, she has, as the title says, a seance tea party, and ends up conjuring a ghost in her house that she had previously thought was the imaginary friend that she'd had as a child. So the first part of this book, I thought it was going to be kind of simple and cute, but maybe not much to write home about plot-wise. But at a certain point in the book, my mind changed, and it's one that definitely made me tear up. I don't want to say too much because it's like a pretty small book, but there are themes in here about growing up and about grief. And I just think I read it at the right moment too. So this one was really sweet. Then finally we have poetry. I've read 3 poetry collections in the past few months. The first one being If They Come For Us by Fatima Asghar, which was just excellent. This is a collection by a Pakistani American person. In this, they talk about kind of place and home, sexuality, and just in general being Arab in a Western country. It's been a while since I've read it, so I don't have too much more to say on it, but it was really good. After that, I read Inventory by Dionne Brand, which absolutely blew my mind. Like the title says, this is an inventory. An inventory of issues, of deaths, events, looking at the 21st century so far. This was published in the early 2000s, so this would have been looking a lot at the wake of war surrounding 9/11. The author is Canadian, but that's still the political landscape. The whole experience of reading this made me feel like either I needed just like a 6th star, or like I had been rating all of their poetry that I'd read too high. Like there was just so much depth in this collection, and there were some lines where, like, even before I processed what they even meant, the visceral feeling that the sound of the words had made so much of an impact by itself, even before like what she was really talking about came into play. It was amazing, and I've since gotten a couple of her other collections, and I'm really excited to read them, although I know they're going to be intense, because this one was one that is very it's talking about a lot of these issues, and from looking at war to also what was happening in Canada, looking at race and immigration and the way that Indigenous people are treated. So it doesn't shy away from anything, and the end of it makes very clear that it, there's not a happy tilt to it, and that's on purpose, because it's reality. So this one, very much about real events, but is ultimately about the character, the person who is kind of cataloging all of this, and will continue to catalog even after the story is through. So that was really intense and like just incredibly brilliant on multiple levels. And then the final poetry book that I read was a reread, and I reread Pansy by Andrea Gibson, who is one of my favorite poets and recently passed away. So I was revisiting some of their poetry. I also listened to a fair amount of it, since the main way that I've really engaged with their stuff earlier on was through the YouTube videos and stuff, and seeing them live. So I'm glad I got to revisit this collection. And so that is the end of what I've read over the past few months in terms of fiction and poetry. If you've read any of these, let me know about it in the comments. If not, let me know about what your favorite read over the past little while has been. If you're interested in the nonfiction that I've read as well, that video should be coming out relatively soon. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.